It comes from one database.
Right. Well, all these highs. Hello there. Welcome to Capitalizing on Cannabis. This is Jennifer Felten. Today I have the esteemed Bruce Andersen, who is here with me today, and we today are going to be talking about reporting systems for licensed cannabis companies. So this is an accounting topic as it relates to how cannabis companies need to record keep and account for their financials. It is different than a traditional non-cannabis related company because of the quasi-legal status and some of the legal requirements. So Bruce here is an expert in working with cannabis companies. He is a CPA, he has an MBA, he has a master's in tax. What else? He's an Army veteran.
Yeah. The other thing is I've been dealing with a lot of systems development work over the years, so therefore cannabis is a very highly regulated area and has a lot of technology involved with it. So therefore I think this is another piece of my experience that will lend itself well to the cannabis business.
Because the state has some required technology that they must use, and as a result the accounting systems have to work with that and communicate properly.
As of last October in the state of California, then the metric system went into place, which requires, it actually has about 18 touch points and starts with the cultivation process and goes completely through to the retail. And the big thing that they added in the past year has been accounting for all of your waste. And so this is an area that everybody has to now report to. And so then it's a question then of what other systems do you have to assist you in making sure that you're fully compliant from the accounting side.
And Bruce is the expert on that, so we are going to have a lot of great information for you today on this topic. So let's talk about the highs of cannabis.
This is a very clever approach to this. So first of all, the first high is that it's highly regulated, and this is from not just and I have to say that from the standpoint of safety to the public, it's very important that we have this. But there's layers upon layers of regulation that gets involved as well, where the buildings have to be properly managed correctly. There has to be proper coding with regards to localities and so forth, as well as then we get into the state agencies and local agencies for taxation purposes.
Right.
That lends itself right into the highly regulated part of the taxation.
Yep.
And where typically, in many cases, an industry has some city licensing to be done. You go down to the courthouse, it takes you half an hour to an hour, and you're done. Now, in the cannabis space, it's a very long process. Every one of the local agencies will want to have their money put in ahead of time. Sometimes it may take a year to 18 months to get approved, if you are in fact approved, and that's at the local level. And then you have the state level is also involved as well to make sure you're licensed correctly. So it's a tandem between local and state.
Yep. So high regulated, high taxed, high cost of entry.
High cost of entry is quite interesting. I have some relatives that go back to the 2005, 6, 7 time frame. They have somebody that says, hey, I'd like to get a weed shop open, which is what they called them in the good old days. And for $20,000, $30,000, you could go through the whole process and get your license for whatever licensing was available at that time, and open up your shop, and you'd be as compliant as it could be in those days.
Right.
Now it's multi-millions of dollars that is what it costs you to get involved, not only for the licensing and so forth, but the building has to be properly coded, has to have lots of security measures and so forth.
And what about after cost of entry, cost of maintenance?
So it is never ending.
Yeah.
There's basically ongoing renewals of licenses. There's ongoing renewal of the building safety codes and all those kinds of things as well. So therefore, you have to buy into an ongoing cost to maintain yourself in this particular industry.
And there's never a shortage of taxes.
Oh, the taxes just keep going.
Yes.
And the problem with the taxes is they all have to match.
Correct.
So I think we're going to cover that a little bit later about how the taxes all interface and so forth. But the long and the short of it is, at the end of the day, you really need to have a high quality accounting system that properly manages all of this for you and comes from one database.
Right. Well, all these highs mean high need for accurate, concise, proper data.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
And in a still a very highly cash-driven business.
That's correct. And that's another layer of complexity, is because you don't have conventional banking. So
Right.
the bank and the ability to have a bank statement is your typically check and balance for most other industries. But basically, you may not have any bank situation at all
Right.
set up. So now you have to go to internal reports. And what happens is you rely then on a lot of tax reporting that's been done, but that manages sales, but it doesn't have anything to do with cost of goods sold or other kinds of
Right.
expenses, because that's not where the agencies get their money from.
Right, right. So why do we care about all this reporting, right? What are the business reasons why this is so important?
So the customer retention is a huge thing. In many cases, there are going to be many retail shops very close together. You can go into a lot of discussion about the quality of the product that's being produced at the cultivation
Yep.
level. That is a big area. There are situations where you may say, well, this is my best brand, but when you try to analyze it, it's like any other consumer product in any other industry, which is, do you really have differentiating factors or not?
Yep.
So that customer management is a big thing.
Right, and then cash management. Right?
Cash management is a huge bugaboo within the industry. And of course, there's additional reporting that the Fed requires, which is an 8300 report, which is anything over $10,000 of transactions in a business environment. So that's if people actually toe the mark with reporting as they should be.
Right.
But cash is just a huge, huge consideration.
Right, and then lastly, inventory.
So this is a product-based industry across the board. It doesn't matter which part of the supply chain that you're involved with, it's all product-based, and so therefore it begs to have good inventory controls.
Right.
And the other thing that now the state agencies, if they ever come in to audit, they're going to say, show me your month-end inventory reports.
Yeah.
And that's a requirement now to be able to maintain your licenses.
Got it. Well, and from a customer standpoint, if you're not maintaining inventory, you don't have the thing the customer wants when they come in, right? You create those kinds of problems.
Exactly,
Right.
yes.
So what are some of the costly mistakes that can happen if you're not doing this kind of recording?
Customers is the first one that comes to mind.
Of course.
Because what happens is if somebody goes to another shop, they seem to get service which they didn't get here.
Right.
Then they're over to that other place. How are you going to beg that customer to come back if you didn't deliver the goods the first go around?
Right.
So therefore, customers' movement is something that as soon as they're gone, you may have to replace that customer.
Right.
Harder to get the customer back.
Yep. What about inventory?
Inventory is a very big consideration. First of all, it is product which has a shelf life to it, so therefore you have to be concerned about that product being fresh and available. There's also considerations for the way in which that product is being sold. Is it being sold at the dimensions or the pack size that customers are looking for?
Right.
But in general, inventory is a huge consideration for what the costs of making mistakes are.
Right. Well, and even in any retail, the potential theft by employees or customers is an issue. If you don't have a good inventory system, you don't know if you're having those
Absolutely
situations
correct.
going.
Yes.
So with all the cash, potential loss and theft of cash.
The cash is just such a huge item. I mean, being in the industry, I do have some customers that don't have banking facilities, so I say, here's my invoice, pay me cash. And even on a simple situation of they just went from the back and counted it and brought it to the front, the machine jammed, incorrect counts. I mean, I was one person asked for a second count.
Yep.
But there's many situations in which cash is just a more difficult concept. The other thing is we're living today, 2020, and we're not living years ago where so much was a cash-based economy or you had checking accounts that you wrote checks out for. Today, so much of our society is based upon credit cards, debit cards. So therefore, this concept of cash is really very difficult.
Yep. And then, if you're not doing these things properly, the tax liabilities.
And the tax liabilities will catch up on you. This is where the accounting system has to be well maintained because it then can guide you if you are developing a liability, which then you have to bank or set aside so you have that money available when the taxes are due.
Right.
There's many people that book tax incorrectly. They don't have visibility to the owners. And so what happens then is that on a quarterly basis, which is generally the time frame that most taxes are paid, they don't have the money. So all of a sudden now, in order for them to get square, they have to pay for last quarter's taxes, and oh, by the way, they have to start setting aside
Right.
for this quarter's taxes as well. It's a double hit.
Right, at the same time. So for these reporting systems that we're going to create, we're going to have different time frames for reporting.
Yes.
Right? So, and there's kind of 5 key time frames that we're looking at.
That's correct.
Right? So
Yes.
daily, right? Weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually.
That's correct.
Right? And all of those have different types of reports and different needs depending upon, you know, whatever regulator you're dealing with, what tax situations you're
That's
dealing
correct.
with, your investors, all those lovely things that come about from that, right?
That's correct.
So, so one of the most important things, and we kind of mentioned it, is that everything needs to be kept in one place.
You have to have an accounting system. In this day and age, accounting systems are very inexpensive. A standard is for many small businesses is QuickBooks.
Right.
QuickBooks has different varieties. It's very easy to go ahead and have that system set up.
Right.
To rely on a business reports that come from this Excel and this manual piece of paper and this cash report in the old columnar pad and so forth, it
Yep.
just is so inconsistent and
Right.
errors can be so frequent.
Yep. So, I mean, I think I pay $60 a month for my QuickBooks for my business. So we're not talking about a huge expense, but having one place where everything's kept for any business, let alone a cannabis business, is definitely a priority.
So we're going to start with daily.
Right. So what are
And-
we looking at daily?
Yeah, and so what I call is the 5-minute books. Basically, on a daily basis, there should be somebody within the organization that helps you assemble this information. And the 5-minute books is it takes about 5 minutes for the owner or whoever the key management are to take a look and see if these indicators are on point or not.
Okay.
So starts with cash. Cash is king, especially in this particular industry. So therefore, is cash being maintained? What is your cash balance?
Right.
The next area is accounts receivable, and depending upon what part of the supply chain of the cannabis industry, you may or may not have accounts receivable. If you're on the retail end, you have a point of sale, and pretty much it's cash and carry.
Right.
So therefore, accounts receivable may be slight, but yet if you have any other part of the industry you're involved with, accounts receivable needs to be managed.
Right.
Accounts payable is what you have received for products generally, but not paid for. So therefore, if you're going to keep your business running, you're going to have to keep your suppliers satisfied.
Right.
So therefore, to know how your accounts payable looks is very important.
Yep.
Next thing, of course, is on-hand inventory. If you don't have it to sell, then basically you can't have
nothing to
sales.
sell.
That's correct. That's correct. And of course, the last thing is sales. And what's very interesting is that you may have a whole variety of operators
Right.
that have a whole variety of backgrounds and so forth. But the one thing they really have an understanding of is, what was my sales today, and
Right.
was it a good day, a bad day, or an okay day?
Yep. They know that data.
They know that data, absolutely. All this other stuff
Yep.
is as important, but from a standpoint of sales, what happened today,
Right.
they can tell you if it's a good day or not.
Yep. So, some of the values of this daily reporting, you know, one of the biggest things is potential fraud, right?
That's right. And what I emphasize to people, especially when they develop their systems, is say, oh, you know, we do monthly reporting. And it's
Right.
like, do you know what happened last Tuesday, the first Tuesday of the month, and now it's 5 weeks later? Very hard to have an understanding of what may have happened on that particular day.
Right.
But if you have these 5-minute books that basically you get reporting on a daily basis, that's your early warning signal that
Right.
you may have a fraud consideration.
Yeah, because a month later, who knows how much you've lost in the interim, right? Making sure that on a daily basis, you know, the irregularities will stand out. You know,
Absolutely.
that if you're actually monitoring this on a regular basis.
That's correct.
Yep. Okay, so next, weekly. What are we worried
So
about?
weekly, what happens is generally your payroll is being done on a weekly basis. Sometimes it's every other week, but generally many of the operators are on a weekly basis. You're not only concerned about how much did it cost you on a weekly basis, but what was the time allocation among your different types of staff that you had. So total hours is really important.
Right.
As you get into these kinds of reports and as your business grows, you can start to understand how it used to take so many hours to get our jobs done.
Right.
Now we're up by another consideration, so therefore that payroll is again a way in which you can start to understand what your one of your biggest costs are of the industry.
Yep. Okay.
Next thing is, of course, the inventory. And we talked about how we were taking a look at inventory on a daily basis, but this as well as some of the other areas, you may have adjustments that occurred yesterday, and if you're taking a look at daily reports going forward, you may not catch yesterday's adjustment.
Right.
So therefore, when you recap things on a weekly basis, now you're going to catch those kinds of inconsistencies.
Right.
The other thing is I was out at a dispensary just the other day. They had a terrible month of January, and it was an inventory thing where basically they had overstocked, and they have people that order, and basically they were over budget by a huge amount of money.
Right.
And they gave me 5 weekly reports, and I said, well, this is interesting. The format is not very conducive to understanding what happened.
Yep.
But what we did is we used that weekly time slice. The other thing we did is basically I said, you've got information, so let's take a look at a trailing 13 weeks. 13 weeks is a quarter of information.
Right.
And as it turned out, we were able to start to see some trends.
Yep.
We were able to immediately stop the hemorrhaging, adjusted the budget,
Right.
and move forward from there. But it was a weekly time slice that we were able to do that with.
Right. It gave you the data to be able to look at a more long-term period.
That's correct.
Right.
Open purchase orders. So purchase orders is the authority to make purchases to a company. So therefore, that is what's kind of scheduled
Right.
to be delivered, and that is not on your books per se,
Yep.
but it's an add-on to the accounting system. That's a way in which you can kind of throttle what's happening with your inventory.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you have a high level of inventory, you've got purchase orders outstanding, you may want to adjust those delivery times
Right.
in order for you to come back into a more normal budgeting arrangement.
Yep. Okay. Cash flow.
Cash flow is something where a lot of cycles go on a weekly for payments in and out. And so therefore, to have a weekly cash budget is something that you now can understand, what your flow is on money coming in.
Yep.
And generally, that's something that it becomes somewhat manageable, that you can understand what that is. And then basically it's the outflow. And can you
Right.
afford to be managing those outflows on the same weekly time schedule?
Right.
Or do you have to adjust that a tad bit as well?
Yeah. And then daily reports being used for the weekly reports.
So as we just mentioned, sometimes on the daily is such a critical dimension of checking your blood pressure on
Yeah.
a daily basis. But then when we take a look at the weeklies, and how are we doing with regards to that daily management? So we roll it right into the weeklies.
Great. So what, are we looking for weekly financial reports? What are they going to do for us?
So the weeklies are going to be the first indicator of what your trending looks like.
Okay.
Dailies are just a little bit too short. Weeklies end up doing that for us.
Got it. So, and we're looking at business performance, all those different kinds of factors in budgeting, all those things on a weekly basis.
That's correct. I mean, and I've told startups and younger businesses over and over again, if you can't do work on a weekly basis and understand what's happening,
Yep.
you may never get to very many monthlies.
That's
It just will
absolutely
never
true.
happen.
Well, cash flow is a challenge for every business,
It
starting
seriously is.
right? Even not my business, cash flow, when you're starting is a challenge.
Absolutely.
And not having the right reporting, you're not going to know what is working and what's not.
The money goes out and you don't know why.
Exactly. Yes, because there's never a shortage of bills.
That's right.
I have found
it's
that.
always there.
Yes. All right. So next we're going to monthly.
Okay, so payroll is typically, as we've talked about, paid on a weekly basis, but the reporting is pretty much wrapped up nicely on a monthly basis.
Okay.
So therefore, that's where the payroll is an important feature.
All right.
Inventory is the next area where, again, sometimes these time slices are shorter for us to manage, but as far as for understanding and where the business is going, then monthly time slices work better. So therefore, inventory is one of those kinds of things where, for example, the state is interested to make sure that they know on a monthly basis what your inventory level is. Again, yesterday I was at a dispensary and we talked about what that ending inventory should look like on a monthly basis. So therefore we have certain indicators in our mind on a monthly.
Got it.
Accounts receivable, traditionally across all kinds of industries, is a 30-day bucket. So therefore AR is 30, 60, 90.
Right.
Same for the cannabis space as well.
Right. Those are standards industry-wide in business.
Absolutely. Right. And so there's really no difference in some respects of cannabis versus any other industry.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So financials?
So the financials. This is really the first time that you're able to recap things for both profit and loss statement, which is operating, and the balance sheet, which tells you your status of assets, liabilities, and equity on a monthly basis. We're going to use those internally. We're not going to be putting those out to the public or any external group of the company, because if you do a really good job at reconciling your accounts and producing their financials, they're going to be probably finished around the second or third week of the month.
Right.
And I can tell you from sitting in meetings of businesses of all sizes, they say, oh, these are bad results. What are we doing this month? And so they just skip over bad months. They just don't even think about what the current trend is of the business. So therefore, monthlies is really a good indicator for getting some solid reports, but generally internal.
Right.
And the last thing is some of the tax authorities now are getting into this as well. So City of LA, for the local licenses, they basically are doing monthly reporting.
Right.
And it is the report. It isn't a prepaid amount, it is the report.
Okay.
So therefore, it's very important that your activities are well documented and you have good solid reports so you can produce a high quality tax report to the City of LA if you are in a municipality that has monthly reporting.
Got it. Okay. So again, we talked about the big ones: profit and loss, a balance sheet, statement of cash flows, and then net profit margin over time?
So net profit margin is kind of about halfway up your P&L.
Okay.
But as it turns out, that's really what your taxable income is for the cannabis space. And so therefore you have to be aware that even though in a traditional business you're paying for all these general operating expenses, what happens is for an income tax reporting standpoint, you're back up to this net profit margin area.
Got it. Okay. So now we're going to talk about quarterly. What are our quarterly reports?
So the quarterly report is really the first set of reports for that time slice that I feel that you should be comfortable with putting those out to the public, or external investors, or even your owners, for which you want to have formal reports that they can put in the file and manage.
Okay.
So the quarterly is where your time slice is long enough where if you have inconsistencies month by month, 3 months will give you a good, nice quarterly report.
Right.
The other thing is that most of the taxing entities will be required to have quarterly reports.
Okay.
So on that case, we've got sales tax, which you may be doing deposits monthly. Quarterly is when that report has to be due. In the state of California, we have additional taxes in the cannabis space called affectionately Cannabis Tax. And that basically is both on the cultivation side as well as the distribution side. That's rolled up into one report. But the other thing which is quite interesting is between sales reports and the cannabis tax, those are again quarterly.
Right.
But the thing that has to be done is to make sure that those roll up correctly compared to the monthly reports that you're giving to your municipality like City of LA.
Got it. Okay. Got it. Okay, so what are the priorities for this quarterly reporting? Payroll.
So payroll we just talked about, where they basically, so in the payroll system, the reports that go to the outside tax agencies, whether it's a federal or a state, those are done on a quarterly basis.
Right.
Sales is going to be reconciled on a quarterly basis and also reconciled against the localities, which we spoke about just recently.
Right.
So therefore that sales is another big thing.
Yep.
And this is where your financials are going to be nicely packaged, and you have to have very good, solid, uniform reporting because every quarter you should be delivering the same kind of financial package.
Right. And then reconciliations.
So the reconciliations also where we had spoken about those being done on a monthly basis. Additionally, then we need to make sure that that monthly for the third month of the quarter actually has been really, really done well, because again, those are going to be reports that are going out to the public or external investors or whatever.
Right. And we have a list of some of the quarterly tax reports: sales tax, cultivation excise tax, distribution excise tax, city and local tax, payroll tax, income tax. Where's the profit?
Yeah, that's right. This is a highly regulated industry with high taxes, and it's very, very important that you're able to let your operators understand what it really costs to do this business,
Right.
and to make sure they understand that they have control to some degree over what they're pricing their products for.
Right.
But it's very, very important for them to understand that there's a big chunk of money that's going to go to the tax man.
Yep.
And so as a result, they have to understand that how hard it is to make a buck in this business
Well,
at this
it's
point.
not like me where I'm just paying sales tax, right? I mean, there's layers of taxes that are added on to these businesses.
Absolutely.
And that's why they legalized it, to tax
That's right.
it.
Well, they legalized it to allow for the broad public to be involved. But the sad part about your comment is that the burden of taxation for the industry is falling upon about 20% of the industry that end up being the legal players. 80% are still untaxed, and that's just really a travesty.
Well, yeah, it's something that has to be addressed at some point. And there are plans to do that. I mean, I just saw a thing about how they're trying to go after landlords who rent to illegal dispensaries to try and get penalize the landlords to then have them not be willing to lease to an illegal dispensary, because the dispensaries themselves are already breaking the law. They're not
That's
too
correct.
worried, right?
Yes.
But if you can get the landlord in on the game, then you have less chance of
Try to
having
attack the partners in crime.
Yes. So level 5, annual reporting. What are we looking at from an annual standpoint?
So the annual report is, of course, what the income tax is based upon. So therefore, that ends up being an extremely important annualized statement that is produced. We talked earlier about how the quarterly is the first report that is going for external reporting purposes, but the annual is where you kind of wrap it up with a bow. And that ends up being the basis then for you to not only take a look at historically what's happened, but then use that annual report to be able to project into the future.
Right.
So generally what I look at when I'm asked to do any budgeting or financial plans or projections is, let's take a look at the last year or two of history and use those to then start to project to the future.
Right. So these are documents that are going to be used to talk to the investors, talk to the tax man, talk to all those different people within the space.
That's correct.
Right.
Yes.
And again, not only are we looking at the past, but they're indicators of where we can potentially go, especially if you're looking at a couple years. You can see, has it been growing? Has it been diminishing?
That's correct.
Where are the expenses high? Have they changed? Right, all those different factors in being able to actually plan for the next.
Yes, and it's such that if you have a couple of years, that's a good thing. You have 3 years, now you've got some points that you can put on a spreadsheet and have some better idea about what kind of trends you can have. And as you mentioned, Jennifer, it's something where this is when you do some heavy-duty analysis, because that is the end of the year. You can have discrepancies occur, you can have some cyclical things, seasonality and so forth, but end of the year, it's a done deal, and let's figure out how we did and project to the future.
Right. Well, and even with any business, 3 years is a kind of a big benchmark. If you've got 3 years of being in business, your likelihood of staying in business increases significantly, and then your ability to plan and manage becomes much easier.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and what's the role of the CPA in all this process?
So it's a great question. Of course, me being a CPA in this presentation,
Yep.
and so you have to take a look at what the tool set is that the CPA should be bringing.
Yep.
Traditionally, it's accounting and tax work, but even if you came through the audit arrangement, which is what many of the CPAs have done in
Right.
order to get their licensing and so forth, the follow-up engagement after doing an audit is going to be what kind of a business consulting is needed because we found some areas that need some attention
Right.
in the business. So therefore, that whole consulting is a big thing that the CPAs can provide. Financial projection work.
Yes.
And the last thing is that CPAs are always tasked with being involved in industries they have some knowledge base about.
Right.
So therefore, do you have knowledge in this industry?
Yep.
CPA should be able to say yes or no. It's even more important in the cannabis space because it's an evolving, growing business.
Right.
So therefore, there's just lots more that goes on than in more traditional businesses that have been around for 50 or 100 years.
Right.
So therefore, it's very important that whoever is doing the work as a CPA really has a proper skill set to be able to deliver for the operator.
Well, and in this industry in particular, with the unique tax codes that apply to them, the average accountant's not going to be properly equipped to manage that.
That's right, and they have to have a part of their practice actually dedicated to this. You can't say, "Look, I have one, so therefore I'm an expert." Right. That just doesn't work anymore.
No, not in this space at all. So, give us an example of a dispensary you've worked with, and kind of how you've been able to help them.
Well, so let's just change that just a tad bit,
Sure.
and let's change from just a dispensary, which is basically a retail operation, in which it has lots of restrictions on what the deductions can be and so
Right.
forth. But let's make it a little bit more involved, where you might have a micro business.
Okay.
So micro business is one that has cultivation, has distribution. They may do some manufacturing as well, and they may or may not, at the end of the line, have a retail outlet
Right.
as well.
Right.
So what happens in this case is that your reporting has to be specific for those different parts of the supply chain.
Right.
I mean, what it costs you to cultivate product, what it costs you to harvest is going to be a whole different ballgame than what it costs you to distribute product.
Right. Right.
So therefore, you have to have sophisticated enough financial records to be able to support each of those different verticals.
Right.
When it comes to inventory, now you have, if you have a micro, now what you have is a very interesting dilemma in that in order to properly report to the state of California with regards to what your cultivation tax is,
Right.
it's driven on invoicing between the cultivator and the distributor.
Right.
Well, how about if you're the person that has both licenses?
Right.
Now what you have
gotta
to have,
document it.
you have to be able to actually to prepare true invoices for the cultivation side.
Right.
You then have to manage your cash flow to say, okay, am I going to pay this invoice, or is there some offset I'm going to do?
Right.
It gets very interesting in that area. Now if we move to the other side and say, look, I don't have a retail license, but I am a distributor.
Yeah.
Now what happens is you have invoices that have to be produced that go to the retailer.
Yep.
So therefore, now you have another kind of accounting transaction.
Right.
And in that case, what happens is a distributor, for both ends of that, is a tax collector and the remitter of taxes.
Right.
So therefore, you have to be able to manage that whole process as well.
Yep.
Very involved.
So what's the keys to successfully managing these records?
So first of all, the ground floor is basically a proper electronic accounting system.
Yep.
If the first thing out of your mouth is, I manage my business out of Excel, you have a ways to go.
Right.
So if you do in fact have an accounting system that in fact has to manage inventory,
Yep.
then that's your first step. The next thing is going to be with regards to categorizing expenses correctly.
Yep.
As I just mentioned, there's a very big difference between what it takes to run a cultivation part of the business as opposed to distribution.
Right.
And likewise for manufacturing. So therefore, that's a very distinct area.
Yep.
The third area has to do with classification of expenses. If in fact you have a distributor and they have rent, in fact, let me just change that a bit. Let me talk about a retailer that also manufactures.
Yep.
And so in that situation, for all the rent for that fancy location you have,
Right.
all those fancy cases that show all the product and so forth, all that's non-tax deductible.
Right.
But for the section that has to do with manufacturing, that is tax deductible.
Yep.
So therefore, you have a split with your rent. With regards to personnel, exactly the same thing.
Yep.
Where your bud tenders, they're absolutely not deductible under any circumstance at this stage. And so that's a situation where you have to classify your employees correctly
Right.
by the part of the business that they're involved with.
Yep. So, so again, our big takeaways: use good software,
That's correct?
follow accounting standards, and use a knowledgeable accountant.
That's correct.
Those are really our core big takeaways from today.
Good recap.
Great. So, thank you so much, Bruce, for being here. This has been great.
This is fun.
Yes. So,
Enjoyed it.
give the audience a little bit of information on how they can reach you.
So I have two websites. The specific one for cannabis is CannabisCPA.tax, and that's the division of my practice which is specifically associated with cannabis. And my AndersonCPA.com, Andersen spelled with an S-E-N, has my general purpose website, which is available for those that may be on ancillary services associated with cannabis. But the core is, again, CannabisCPA.tax.
Great. Thank you so much for being
My
here.
pleasure.
Thank you to our audience for watching this episode of Capitalizing on Cannabis. If you like this video, click the like button. Do look at our website and see all the other videos that we have. We love having you, and we have all kinds of different information and areas to talk about. So thank you very much, and have a good day.